Chapter 391, Admit Defeat. At the moment, a huge mob of players was bustling their way towards the North Gate in Lori City. Among them were mercenaries from Lori City looking to assassinate their target, and also Yunjuan City players rushing to assist. Both parties clashed all the way to the city, creating quite the boisterous scene. But the first to reach the North Gate were still the players from Lori City. This was entirely because they had a huge advantage over those from Yunjuan City. Their players that had lost their lives would all respawn in Lori City. As for those from Yunjuan City, their accounts were still registered back in Linshui City, so any mercenary members that were slain all revived back in Linshui City, while the members from traversing 4 seas were sent all the way back to Yunjuan City upon their deaths. Those Lori City mercenaries that had respawned somewhere near the North Gate were naturally the first to arrive. These men hurried over to the North Gate and looked all around. Their suspicion rose, thinking that everyone around them could be Todd. They used their appraisal skill on all the players passing by, yet they discovered nothing. "We don't see Todd anywhere. Where has he gone?" These players hollered across the various guild channels. "Search every street that leads out of the North Gate, split into groups and find them." The order was passed down. The mercenaries formed up into groups of 2s and 3s and each began searching through the streets. At the same time, these mercenaries could feel the urgency of the situation and no longer cared about the principles of a mercenary that they often spoke about, as they began calling for their friends to inquire after more information, mobilizing everything they could for this mission. This raised the bar and made things a lot more lively. After all, even if the strongest mercenary group and the largest guild were not one and the same in most cities, the difference would not be that far off. Eternal War Mercenary Group was naturally the strongest mercenary group in Lori City, but the second strongest belonged to Fallen Leaves Returning to Roots, and the third strongest mercenary group was also from Fallen Leaves Returning to Roots. The guild had managed to create 2 strong mercenary groups under its banner. Furthermore, the other mercenary leaders were mostly in close contact with large guilds. This single call to arms made it that much easier to call for their help as a result, so plenty of players actually came to heed the call. While those rushing in from the various grinding spots might not make it in time, those that were already in the city easily volunteered to help out with this task. There should not be too many of them, and there will undoubtedly be unfamiliar faces acting all secretive and looking real shifty. Take note that there will be an NPC among them. This was the unique feature that the mercenaries of Lori City had determined about Oathless Sword, but it was entirely inaccurate to the situation at hand, since right outside the prison at the moment, both parties were actually locked in a heated battle, and were far from being secretive. When Deepwaters noted that his men were no match for the indomitable mage and thief before them, he sighed as he called out loudly, "All right, hold your fire." But this order to hold their fire was essentially useless, since it was his men that were actually being chased and hounded at the moment. Gufei and Svelte dancers had devoted their attention to slaying these men, so neither heard his cry. Oathless Sword, however, heard it. But he was also worried this was some dastardly scheme the enemy had cooked up. Vast Lushness was someone who had been baptized through a veritable nest of PvP and had seen plenty of such schemes, where a cry to cease fire would instead be exploited for an opportunity to counterattack, so she did not say a word, either. Deepwaters was pissed after shouting himself hoarse and had half a heart to fight to the bitter end. But, Coco held him back as she stood beside him, yelling out once more, "Stop fighting. We admit defeat." Only Svelte Dancer was still focused on the hunt at this point, while Gufei immediately stopped his attack. This was all thanks to the habits he had formed all these years training Kung Fu, where he would often spar with someone. These sessions would only last until a certain point, so no matter how absorbed they were in the match, they were very sensitive to the words "admit defeat." While Coco was not any louder than Deepwaters, her usage of the correct term allowed Gufei to halt the slash that he was about to deal toward his current target, a conditioned reflex that had become a habit after years of training. He turned back and saw the wry smile on Deepwaters, who was pointing over to Svelte Dancer. "Please, stop her." Gufei nodded as he took out 2 apples from his pocket, taking a bite out of one first before throwing the other in a swift motion, striking Svelte Dancer on the back of her head. Svelte Dancer grabbed a hold on to her head as she turned back smartly, Hearing the crunch of the apple Goofy was biting on as he pointed to Deep Waters and said, "That's enough." That guy's admitted defeat. Eh? Svelte Dancer turned to stare at Deep Waters. Deep Waters' bitter smile was still hanging upon his face. "We give up." With that, he waved his hand to his comrades that remained and said, "Remove the traps." These hunters went forward to remove the traps that they had set, but Deep Waters could tell in a glance that there were still plenty of traps that remained because their owners had died. Since they could not safely remove those traps set by others, he waved his hand and commanded, "Trigger those other traps, as well." These men all nodded as they began to search for the other traps and triggered them one by one, rendering them all immobile in that instant. "Brother Deep Waters, there's no need to go to such extent." Oathless Sword had once more opened his mouth to speak at this point. Both parties had only clashed due to the competitive quest they were on. Now that they had already admitted defeat and the prison was right before them, of course Oathless Sword was feeling magnanimous and thought there was no need for them to embarrass themselves so far as to even step onto their own traps. So he quickly interrupted them in hopes of preventing them from troubling themselves. "Oi oi, aren't you being thinking a bit too much here?" Before Deep Waters could even speak, it was Vast Lushness who interjected as she regarded him with scorn. "This is a rule with the trap skill. If they do not step on them themselves, does that mean those guys who have died would have to return to do so themselves? What if they respawn back in Linian City? How troublesome would that be?" Oathless Sword had a modicum of understanding towards this rule, but he had not thought of it at the moment. Actually, Vast Lushness only understood why they were doing this because she had spent so much time hanging out with that bunch of ruffians from Forever in Flowers. Deep Waters gazed at Vast Lushness and said, "This beauty sure is clever." Vast Lushness, however, nudged her head towards the person beside him. Deep Waters' face contorted as he saw Coco staring at him. "Ahem! Of course, that is only in comparison to that guild leader over there," Deep Waters hurriedly added in order to avoid Coco misunderstanding. He was not afraid to deride someone like Oathless Sword, whom he was barely acquainted fault with. If Oathless Sword had been feeling magnanimous before, and was hoping to assuage any potential bitterness with Deep Waters, the comment he just made had essentially eliminated it all. He turned towards Goofy with a blackened face and said, "I'm off to finish the quest." Goofy nodded as he munched on that apple. Oathless Sword was excited. He could feel each step he took up the stairs tremble ever so slightly as he did so. The long nights and times he had spent busying about for this mission, the sacrifice of his many comrades and brothers alike, all of it was about to pay off in a major way. What sort of rewards awaited him? Just as Oathless Sword was fantasizing, Goofy suddenly interrupted, "Wait. What?" Oathless Sword felt his heart lurch. "The trap Todd was caught on isn't over yet," Goofy pointed out. Oathless Sword turned around and saw that Todd was still helplessly standing there like a block of wood, the trap that ensnared him clamping him down. There was nothing Oathless Sword could do but wait for that trap to disappear. Deep Waters' underlings were also waiting for the traps they had triggered to finish as well. Goofy and the others stood by the side together, with Deep Waters and Coco standing a short distance away. These men all looked at one another, not a single word exchanged between anyone. It was all quiet. And not too far away, there were already players checking them all out. They were near the west gate, and the mercenaries from Lori City were currently paying special attention to the area around all the 4 city gates. Why would they believe YMH when he told them the target would be at the north gate? The Lori City mercenaries were not so gullible as to take it at face value, especially since those at the north gate had already reported that they saw no trace of Todd or the players escorting him, which only made the others focus their efforts on the areas around the other gates. By now, the battle outside the prison had already ended, but a bunch of players still standing there without moving in that deserted street created a very strange scene for any onlookers. Even though the scene before them was quite disparate from the original description of not too many people and secretive, the natives realized a lot of them were undoubtedly unfamiliar faces upon closer inspection. Thus, the leader in charge of staking out the east gate personally led a few men and began to act as if they were passing by. Everybody split the job among themselves as they carefully applied their appraisal skill on those players standing around. After walking a certain distance, An expression of astonishment was visible on one of the players in that group as he excitedly shouted across the party channel, "Todd!" This was a mercenary who had the mission on hand. The moment he got close, Todd's name appeared above his head, just like how the serial number of a bounty target would appear above their head. As the other players in that party were people who came to help afterwards and did not have the mercenary mission, none of them could see this change. The message quickly spread like wildfire, informing everybody of the situation, the number of players, their position, etc. Seeing that the enemy had yet to become suspicious of them, these men carried on using their appraisal on everybody. All they saw were question marks when they attempted to appraise the top-tier experts like Gouffé, much less someone of Svelte Dancer's equipment standard. Those men that Deep Waters had brought along were all elites that he had handpicked for this operation, so their standard was naturally better than that of the average player. After appraising these men, the party immediately put aside their thought of engaging immediately, believing that hiding their intentions this way was a pretty good option by itself. Unfortunately, they had underestimated the enemy's observation skills. Svelte Dancer, Gouffé, Vast Lushness, Deep Waters and even Oathless Sword were all experts that had seen plenty. It was not necessarily suspicious to find this group of players passing by like this, neither was it too suspicious for players to toss out appraisal skills casually like this. It was a very common sight in MMOs. What made them suspicious, however, was the manner in which they passed by. These men were calm and confident, yet they looked a little too eager. This was especially obvious after their expressions were particularly exaggerated the moment they discovered that the people here were not the usual experts with their appraisal. "Who are you people?" Oathless Sword was the first to call them out, since he was naturally the one most concerned with the mission. He was unwilling to let go once even a sliver of doubt that crossed his mind. But the first to act was actually Gouffé, who darted straight towards them. If a fight broke out, he would be able to attack at the first sign of trouble. These men's expression looked strange the moment Oathless Sword asked them that question, but the man in the lead calmly replied, "We're just passing through." Deep Waters could also tell something was fishy with these men, as his originally defeated expression reignited with hope once more. If there was a chance, he would surely make use of the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. Chapter 392, sharing with you the movers and shakers of each mercenary group from Lori City had already received the following message: "The target has appeared outside the prison, but the combat power of the enemy there is extraordinary, immediate assistance required." Many of them could not help but think, the prison. Could the final location for the enemy's quest be the prison? Now that they have made it there and are no more than 1 or 2 steps from the entrance, what is the point of sending help? This was especially true for the mercenary leader named Pholus. He had just managed to make it over to the North Gate, but he was utterly disappointed when he received the message. Forget the fact that he had not managed to gain anything from this mission, just the fact that he had personally lost a whole level had already made him the most aggrieved out of all the leaders in the coalition. "Hi, Pholus." He suddenly heard someone call out his name happily. Pholus raised his head to see who this person was, and immediately turned to leave. But that man had already sped over to block his path. "Eternal Dominion, what are you trying to do?" Pholus felt very angry, but he knew he could not afford to antagonize the man before him. "So, any news?" "Where are they?" Eternal Dominion asked. "How would I know?" Pholus lied. "Tell me the truth." Eternal Dominion earnestly pressed him. "I don't know, either. Why don't you go find out for yourself?" Pholus blurted out. "Our manpower isn't anywhere near what you guys have." "Come on now, share with me what info you have," Eternal Dominion prodded him. Pholus helplessly looked around for help, but all the other men of the coalition that he had arrived at the North Gate with avoided his gaze. Who in Lori City did not know who Eternal Dominion was? Everybody was busy hiding from this man, so why would any of them willingly step out and paint a target on themselves for him? Pholus felt all the more miserable when he saw the immoral display from these men and no longer had the wish to hide the truth for these friends, so he said, "He's over by the prison and they are about to finish it, so what's the point of going over?" "Is a man in black robes over there?" Eternal Dominion asked. Pholus froze. The descriptions of the enemy had indeed mentioned such a person, and now that the two sides had already clashed, the ferocity of this person was confirmed, given how the most recent update mentioned he had already slain 5 players, with one being an expert from some local guild. There is indeed such a person. Pholus nodded. Let's go, then. Eternal Dominion raised his hand and led the band of brothers he had brought along with him. Pholus instantly had the urge to watch the ensuing battle, so he decided to follow along. Plenty of those men from the coalition were currently castigating him for his action, which served only to anger him even more. These men did not lend a hand and pretended to be clueless when it was time for them to stand up against Eternal Dominion. When he had acquiesced, these men suddenly grew backbones and found their integrity once more. It was just too hateful. Outside the prison, the 5 men from the mercenary group coalition had tried their best to appear to be no more than pedestrians, but had still managed to draw the enemy's attention. Just as Gufei and the others were hesitating over what to do with them, the 5 men seized the opportunity to attempt an ambush. The orders from above mentioned the high possibility that the final destination for these people was the prison, so they had to risk it all and stall for time. The 5 men figured those men watching the east gate would still take some time to arrive, so they could only grit their teeth and engage head-on. But Gufei was already prepared for this possibility and reacted so quickly that the moment these 5 men had the thought to act, it was actually Gufei that struck first. These 5 could barely make sense of what happened when Gufei suddenly bolted right in front of them and let them taste his fearsome twin incineration, disintegrating them in a flash of ash and light. Those men from the east gate were already making their way over, numbering somewhere between 20 and 30 men. What do we do? Oathless Sword panicked. It's just a handful of men, what are you so flustered for? Gufei chided him. That's right, we are all experts of the highest caliber, this is nothing at all, I'm sure you guys can fend them off, Deep Waters said, even as he languidly stepped aside, giving them space to do battle, and showing his clear intention to watch the ensuing show even as he fired off a message to his remaining underlings. Even though these men were immobile after triggering those traps, their hands were ready for any sudden changes. How much longer before that trap of his falls off? Gufei asked Deep Waters. Deep Waters abruptly turned to one of his men. Hey, you there? How much longer for that trap to fall off? That man turned his head and continued to pass on the message. Hey, how much longer until the trap falls off? The next person stifled his laughter, turned around and was about to pass on the message, but Sveltdancer had appeared right in front of him and instead finished him off with a swift jab. Anyone else? Sveltdancer asked, as the wise guy vanished. The rest of the hunters lowered their heads. Even Deep Waters had no words as his mouth gaped. Vicious as Sveltdancer's method was, it was also rather effective. Figuring Deep Waters would no longer dare to make a joke out of things, Gufei asked once more, how much longer? Deep Waters was extremely despondent right now. After all, he was one of 5 renowned experts in Parallel World, yet he was actually being suppressed so thoroughly by these people before him. There's still 30 seconds left. Deep Waters sighed. He had already taken note of the time the moment Todd stepped onto the trap. In Sakurazakamuni's words, this was a quality any passable hunter should possess. Since it's just for a short while, just head into the prison the moment the trap ends. Gufei patted Oathless Sword. Oathless Sword nodded. Gufei stood by the street entrance brazenly. There were only 20 or 30 men coming their way. Gufei was not merely stalling for time facing them like this, he would be actively killing them as best as he could. But because he did not wish to get his park value to 30, he could not act too unrestrained. By the time the 20-odd men made it to the east gate, 30 seconds had already passed. Todd's leg was free once more as Oathless Sword delightedly made his way towards the prison entrance. Gufei, Sveltdancer, and everyone else were now all eyeing those men charging right towards them. Deep Waters figured that this would be his final chance and he quickly signaled his men with just eye contact. The hunters all received the message tacitly and raised all their bows at Oathless Sword. Todd was following Oathless Sword, so if they were to kill off the man assigned to lead him in, Todd would simply stay still where he was. Deep Waters deeply regretted only realizing this crucial point at this stage, otherwise he would have directed all their attacks at the person in charge of leading the NPC. Had he followed this line of thinking, perhaps these people would not have even made it into Linian City. Arrows flew out in unison. Whether they had any chance to kill Todd after killing off Oathless Sword was uncertain, But Deepwaters did not care to put too much thought into this. It was better to just take things one step at a time now. But who would have expected that at same time the hunters raised their bows to fire, Othless' sword had already charged out, hurtling towards one of the hunters in their midst. This charge of his allowed him to evade quite a few of the arrows coming towards him, even as he managed to bury his sword in one of these men. The man was currently immobile thanks to the trap he had stepped on before, so there was no way for him to fly out upon contact, either. Othless' sword brutally slashed, and killed that man off. The other hunters had only managed to knock their second arrows, yet none of them had anticipated Othless' sword to charge out once more, and once again finished off another hunter in a similar fashion. In that instance, everybody thought the berserker Othless' sword looked a little awe-inspiring as he stood there with his two claymores in hand. Othless' sword glanced at Deepwaters resolutely and said, "I'm not just some scrub. Did you really think you could kill me off just like that?" Deepwaters was really dejected, but he could not deny that he had indeed ignored this point. He thought Othless' sword was nothing but the average noob in his eyes, someone that he could kill with a snap of his fingers, and had absolutely forgotten the fact that this man was a leader of a large guild, whose equipment and skill was naturally comparable to his own. Just the example of the two consecutive charges demonstrated this fact, as it was something unique that an average warrior would not have been able to pull off. Just as he had no idea what he should say, he suddenly sensed a glow above his head and he looked up only to find a circle of flames forming brilliantly above. Deepwaters instantly realized that Gufei had also attacked the moment he saw the sudden move they made at Othless' sword. Quick, dodge! Deepwaters tugged on Coco and darted away from the descending wheel of 1,000 infernos. He looked at some of his comrades, where Sveltdancer had activated her fleet foot and dashed in, a red-hot blur that left behind a string of white lights as she flitted from hunter to hunter. He had already lost all the hunters he had brought along for this operation, leaving just him and Coco still alive. For now. Vast Lushness could only shrug as she made an expression of "See, I told you so" to Gufei. That was when Deepwaters realized that they had not dropped their guard against him at all. This chance to fish in troubled waters he thought he had merely called in what was due. Now that Gufei had chased Deepwaters away with his descending wheel of flames, he immediately joined Sveltdancer right in the fray, slaughtering his way into the 20-some man formation coming for them. With Vast Lushness behind supporting them from time to time, even a force 10 times the size of the current party would be no match for them. Othless' sword broadside through the prison entrance at this time. He felt plenty of emotions intermingling within him the moment he reached out to push the door open. The door gave way as the familiar sight of two NPC guards stood within. Whenever Othless' sword broadside to the prisons for safekeeping in the various cities, it was always these two NPCs that admitted him. But this time, in addition to the two guards, there was an NPC present that looked like a captain, who nodded towards Othless' sword when they took in Todd. A series of system prompts rang out in Othless' sword's ears almost instantaneously, pushing him to the brink of tears in his excitement. Those players that had not failed the quest due to death were all awarded experience and gold. Aside from that, traversing 4 seas instantly rose to a level 6 guild. Just the spoon alone made Othless' sword lightheaded. Raising a guild's level was extremely difficult. There had not been a level 6 guild yet anywhere in Parallel World, and the disparity in strength between each level was like heaven and earth. A level 1 guild had a maximum capacity of 50 members, a level 2 150, level 3 300, level 4 500, and level 5 topped out at 750 people. The growth in numbers each step of the way grew incrementally. And what of level 6? Othless' sword hurriedly pulled out his guild tab and looked. The limit was now at 1050. Traversing 4 seas had its capacity increased by a whole 300 members, equivalent to all the members in a level 3 guild. The moment Othless' sword saw the reward he had earned, his peacock feathers preened and unveiled themselves. The first message he sent was not to any of his comrades in the guild, but it was instead to the guild leader of Corrals, brave Surge. Surge, my guild just rose to level 6, I'm sharing this wondrous news with you the first chance I had. Ha 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 ha. Othless' sword stood by the guild entrance as he laughed and gloated uncontrollably. Brave Surge naturally started cursing down the streets when he received this message. Back in Lori City, colorful expletives were also being exchanged, and in far greater quantity. They had all received the system prompt of mission failure at the same time. Cheers and celebration naturally erupted from the members from traversing 4 seas that had also received the system prompt of their quest completion. The most pitiful bunch was naturally the party that was still engaged with Gufei and the 2 ladies on the street leading to the prison. None of them were actually mercenaries that had picked up the limitless competitive mission, so of course none of them received the system prompt regarding the mission's failure. At this moment, these men had unfortunately been forgotten with no one to keep them in the loop, so they continued to lose their lives in the fight and became park points for Gufei and Svelte Dancer, instead. Chapter 393, My last name's Gu. Fortunately, this pitiful bunch did not get thoroughly wiped out. These men were at least able to make their own judgment, and seeing 1/3 of their own party die off so easily, what could the remaining 2/3 do? Humans were naturally selfish, so nobody was willing to sacrifice themselves over nothing. The players subconsciously backed off while they still had their lives intact. By the time the mercenaries remembered these men and sent them a message about the situation, the lot of them no longer had any doubts in mind and turned to flee. Gufei and Svelte Dancer do not give chase, either. Having fought prolonged battles consecutively like this had expended quite a lot from them. Svelte Dancer had taken and survived plenty of attacks thanks to her top-notch equipment, but her HP were actually in dire straits at the moment. The moment the battle was over, she hurriedly pulled out a bread to munch on as she turned to regard Vast Lushness. Don't just take care of him. Give me a heal a bit. Vast Lushness was stunned. You need healing, too? Svelte Dancer's indomitable defense had left a deep impression on almost everyone, causing them to view her as some undying superhuman over time. Pros and cons were often so close to one another. The 3 headed towards the prison together. They saw Othless Sword standing by the stairs right outside the entrance as they got close, a catatonic look in his eyes as his mouth parted to reveal a wide grin, softly laughing to himself from time to time. What's up with him? Svelte Dancer was visibly anxious at this sight, despite being someone who barely blinked an eye when she killed others. He's probably sharing the joys of victory with his fellow comrades. Vast Lushness was a little surprised after she said this, as this was something that she had almost forgotten since she had not experienced such a feeling for quite a while. Thankfully, Othless Sword had not transcended into the state where he had forgotten everything that was happening around him. He could still see who was standing before him, registering the 3 with a glance as he walked up to them, all smiles. He originally wanted to shake hands with each of them for a job well done, but Svelte Dancer was holding her bread in one hand and her dagger in the other, while Vast Lushness looked to be in deep thought, not even looking at him. Othless Sword was a little disappointed when his intention to show his affections to these beauties was dashed. In the end, all he could do was grasp Gufei's hand with both of his own, shaking it vigorously. Thank you for your hard work. Othless Sword said emotionally. All in a day's work, Gufei replied steadfastly. Those players that had been killed by his swords would surely be in tears had they heard how casually he said that. There was someone like that present, as Deepwaters had yet to leave. He was standing by the wall with Coco, and let loose a heavy sigh when he heard Gufei's response. He said, there's truly plenty of absurd things in this world. Let's go. Coco prodded. Deepwaters nodded glumly, holding her hand, and was just about to leave when he suddenly saw a troop of players hastily making their way down the street that led to the north gate. By the time they drew a little closer, Deepwaters could just make out that there were plenty of fighters among these players making their way over, and instantly froze up. Is that the rumored Eternal War mercenary group from Lori City? Deepwaters saw the direction these men were heading in, and that they were dashing straight towards the prison entrance. Looks like we're in for quite a show. Deepwaters' eyes shone. Hey! Coco looked discontented. Haha, we're only watching. We don't lose anything watching this free show. Deepwaters hooked Coco in his arms as they waited for the players from Eternal War to pass them before following along. Outside the prison, Othless Sword was not yet done with his shower of thankful words expressing his gratitude, yet the attention of these 4 from Yunjuan City were already drawn towards the imposing troop of players marching straight towards them. By the time they neared them, the fact that their group was largely composed of fighters easily allowed these 4 to guess just who they were. Does it ever end? Svelte Dancer began to wolf down that bread she had been munching on this whole time. Vast Lushness had already eaten a bunch of grapes to restore her mana. Oathless Sword's HP was not in the best of shape at the moment, but because he had been busy celebrating his success moments ago, he had not had the time to replenish it. Now, he was quickly picking through his dimensional pocket as he pulled up bread, sandwiching a banana in between as he shoved it into his mouth. Ugh! The three others felt a wave of nausea when they saw how Oathless Sword used all his strength to smush that banana between the bread. To think you can stomach that, Svelte Dancer had even taken 2 steps to the side away from him. Why would Oathless Sword even care about that at the moment, polishing off the bread and banana combo clean off in 2 or 3 bites, just as the players from Eternal War arrived before them. Brothers, the mission is over. Do you gentlemen have any other business? Oathless Sword wiped his mouth as he addressed them. However, the men in front were not even looking at him, as someone pointed a finger at Gouffé, saying to the fighter in the lead, "That's the man." 2 pairs of eyes met. Gouffé had already guessed the identity of this man. This person was most likely the leader of the Eternal War mercenary group, another player that was known as one of the 5 unyielding experts, Eternal Dominion. The members of Eternal War all knew a thing or two about Kung Fu, so it only made sense that the leader of such a group would be a cut above the rest. With that thought in mind, Gouffé naturally needed to check this person out. That person stepped forward and greeted Oathless Sword. "This matter isn't related to the mission. We're here looking for this brother here." At this moment, Oathless Sword demonstrated the breadth of his spirit that came from a seasoned veteran. Facing off against this group that made any player from Lori City shrink away, Oathless Sword instead boldly walked forward 2 steps and eyed Eternal Dominion evenly. "Any matter that has to do with Brother Miles here is my matter, as well." "Miles?" Eternal Dominion seemed to be unaware of Gouffé's IGN. "1,000 miles drunk," Gouffé clarified, gazing at him. "I'm called Eternal Dominion." Eternal Dominion grinned. Oathless Sword, who had been standing in between the 2 men, was treated as nothing but hair. Just as he was feeling a little awkward, Gouffé instead told him, "Guild Leader Ruthless, tend to your own business. There's no problems here." "That's right, tend to your own business," Eternal Dominion said to Oathless Sword. Oathless Sword could not make sense at what these 2 were doing. He took 2 steps back and was unsure if he should stay or leave, hesitating for the longest moment. Gouffé was just about to say something when he saw the space beside Eternal Dominion shimmer as a fiery figure appeared, stabbing a dagger right at his waist. Before she even appeared, Eternal Dominion had already slightly slackened his knee and lowered his elbow, his body listing slightly to the side as a result. Others would not be able to read this minute change in his posture, but Gouffé saw it all too clearly. Realizing something was about to happen and about to say something about it, Svelte Dancer's shadowy figure had already appeared before him. He had no idea when she had actually entered into stealth, because her target at the moment was Eternal Dominion and not him. Gouffé had naturally not sensed that she was attempting to close in on Eternal Dominion. Only realizing something was not right when he saw Eternal Dominion change his pose, before he could even warn anyone, Svelte Dancer had already thrust out her dagger. Gouffé only managed to yell out, "Watch out!" Svelte Dancer had thought her stab was sudden and infallible, even turning her head as she angrily shouted, "What are you shouting for?" She had thought Gouffé was alerting Eternal Dominion to her attack, but actually his warning had been for her. This dagger she had thrust out struck the pose Eternal Dominion had preemptively moved into. His 2 hands surged forth, one grabbing hold of her wrist while the other went for her waist, his hips dipping down, his whole body squatting and quickly recovering in the next moment. Svelte Dancer was thrown down to the ground with a jerking motion. The changes Eternal Dominion made at each step were extremely fast. Most people would only see Svelte Dancer appear and suddenly fall down, but Gouffé could clearly see each and every move, exhaling in awe. Advent of the Cloud Dragon. "That's right, to think you could tell just from that," Eternal Dominion laughed even as he looked down at Svelte Dancer. "Babe, are you okay? Need me to help you to your feet?" "You." Of course, Svelte Dancer was fuming so much that she could hardly find any words. She paid no heed to Eternal Dominion's proffered hand as she got up by herself, stalking away, somewhat embarrassed. Vast Lushness came over to help dust off the thief as everybody's gaze locked onto Gufei and Eternal Dominion. The whole street descended into silence. Is that the Dragon Fist style? Gufei suddenly asked. Good eye, Eternal Dominion smiled. And you are? My last name's Gu, Eternal Dominion said. Gu Jian's Gu family? Gufei asked. Eternal Dominion nodded. How would you address Elder Gu Ye? He's my father, Eternal Dominion chuckled. I've met him before, Gufei said. I know. Eternal Dominion stopped smiling as he said emotionlessly, our family had a friendly sparring session with yours 10 years back, and he lost to you. You were only 15 years old. That was just the elder going easy on me in an effort to enable the growth of us younglings, Gufei replied. You don't have to say that. He was very satisfied with his loss, Eternal Dominion said. Does that mean you know me? Gufei found this to be a little strange. Of course, we are all martial practitioners. How would we not know about the fourth young master of Gu family, the kung fu prodigy whose talent is said to be seen only once every 100 years? Eternal Dominion said. You flatter me. Gufei quickly became modest, but he still found this to be strange. While it was not exactly strange for people within the kung fu circle to know of his name, he could not recall meeting the person before him at all, so he found it a little weird that he was able to identify him just from this meeting. Yes, if I am not mistaken, I don't think we've met before, have we? Gufei asked directly. Nope. So how do you recognize me? Gufei asked. I may not have met you in person, but I've seen photos of you. Eternal Dominion said. Photos? Where? Gufei was nonplussed. On the internet, of course. Online? Gufei found this to be stranger the more he inquired after it. When did a photo of him make its way onto the net? Are you not aware? It was now Eternal Dominion's turn to be surprised. Uncle Gu recently had nothing to do, so he made a website for the Gu family. That's where I saw a photo of you. The Gu family made a website. Gufei was extremely astonished, for he had not heard a word about this before. This Uncle Gu you mentioned, that's my father? Gufei immediately asked. Eternal Dominion nodded. The old man's pretty free recently, huh? Gufei muttered. Not really. Uncle Gu has been really busy recently. Eternal Dominion was indeed a martial practitioner, for his keen sense of hearing actually picked up what Gufei was mumbling to himself. You've seen him? Gufei was even more shocked at this revelation. That's right. I've specifically gone over to visit your place. Chapter 394, Probe. Tempo. Gufei did not ask Eternal Dominion the reason he had made a trip over to visit the Gu family. He knew the answer without even having to ask. Now that they were in an era where Kung Fu was on the decline, the various martial families or factions had to let go of the antiquated traditions of sectarianism, allowing greater movement between everyone in the community. The generation of Gufei's father, for example, would often meet up with other fellow practitioners and conduct forums or even organize tea parties for everyone. Aside from these activities that involved more people, there were also often other more private exchanges and movements. Eternal Dominion's mention of his father and Gufei's sparring was one such instance, a meeting which allowed everybody to interact and casually exchange pointers with one another. There was nothing official about such exchanges, and the people involved would often not place much importance towards them, but everyone would make a mental note of things in actuality. The year, date, and time, who they visited and who they defeated, a certain date where they visited which family and who lost to whom, the number of rounds they went, the tally of the results. Everyone had a good idea in their hearts how each and every encounter had gone. It was just that nobody would say it out loud, even if they fussed over it in their hearts. Throughout this process, there were even people who had whimsical thoughts and believed Kung Fu should learn from how sports had developed and organize some sort of Kung Fu competition, utilizing the home and away points system to keep track, or have some sort of East vs West divisional playoffs to select strong competitors, and then host a global Kung Fu meet once every 4 years. While the plan sounded great on paper, it was never realized or implemented in the end. After all, Kung Fu was nothing like most sports out there, due to the fact the skill was used for killing. There were already unavoidable injuries just from the casual sparring they had with one another, so who knew what might result if they actually went ahead with such a large scale, put your name on the line, head-on competition setting. So Kung Fu could only stagnate until this very day, propagated and passed on in a small circle of practitioners. Eternal Dominion coming to look for the Gu family like this was nothing but a private visit that happened frequently, so Gu Fei did not bother to press for more details. I was originally looking for you, but it's a pity you weren't around, Eternal Dominion said. Oh, what happened after that? Gu Fei had indeed rarely visited home after he moved out and became a teacher. After that, well, I got a few pointers from Uncle, Eternal Dominion said. He beat you up? Gu Fei suddenly revealed much sympathy across his face. No. He gave me pointers, Eternal Dominion insisted. I'm sure they were pointers, but I know how he goes about giving those, Gu Fei said. Eternal Dominion was quiet for a moment, before suddenly saying, I originally visited in hope of getting some pointers from you. Gu Fei nodded and did not say anything further. He had already suspected something like that the moment Eternal Dominion had mentioned the bout against his father 10 years ago. It was nothing as serious as avenging his father's name, though it was in line with such thoughts. A more appropriate sentiment would most likely be him standing up for his father. Seeing that there was such a coincidental connection between Eternal Dominion and himself, it was apparent that the two of them would have a match here today. Gu Fei was of course more than happy to oblige when it came to fighting, so all that mattered now was how Eternal Dominion would broach the subject. But who would have guessed Eternal Dominion would actually gaze at him with knitted brows? Why did you choose to be a mage? That was like rubbing salt on his wounds, as Gu Fei revealed a look of sadness, shaking his head. Let's not talk about that, it's a long story. In that case, I guess I'll have to find some time to visit your family again someday, Eternal Dominion said. There's no need for that. Gu Fei was flustered. This place will do. We're already here. Let us fight here and now, to the death. There's no need to hold back. Eternal Dominion was hesitant. Considering that the fighter job class he was using had quite an advantage over the mage, he felt the victory he would get would not represent his skill. Gu Fei did not seem to mind, however, and had even guessed what Eternal Dominion was thinking, chuckling, we're just playing around. There's no need to mind too much. In that case, I'll just not use any of the in-game skills, then, Eternal Dominion replied. The skills that a fighter job class possessed were in the punches and kicks he dealt. Experts like him would have no problems executing a perfect combination of their kung fu and skills. Exactly like he had just displayed his advent of the Cloud Dragon on Svelte Dancer. He could have easily activated his fighter skill, Seismic Toss, afterwards, but Eternal Dominion had not done so, showing mercy to the lady. Seeing that Gu Fei was a mage and already had a disadvantage when it came to their job class, he made the decision to not use any of the in-game skills he had in his arsenal. Oh, then I won't use my spells either. Gu Fei nodded in agreement. Every skill that a fighter had could easily be incorporated into his kung fu techniques and moves, but how could a mage's spells work in that case? Eternal Dominion wanted to make a comment when he heard what Gu Fei had said, but he decided against it at the last second. Unarmed then? Gu Fei asked, as he stowed his sword back in his dimensional pocket. What do you mean unarmed? A fighter's weapon is his gloves. Svelte Dancer hollered out. That's right. But I am indeed unarmed. Eternal Dominion showed his hands to everyone. Indeed, there was nothing like the gloves that a fighter would normally have equipped in this game. You can use your weapon. Eternal Dominion had already felt that his job class held too much of an advantage in this fight, so he decided to give Gu Fei a bit of an edge, otherwise this fight would be pointless. No, there's no need, we can spar with weapons later, was Gu Fei's response. Eternal Dominion had nothing else to say at this point. His comrades behind him had already tacitly retreated a distance and opened up a space for their duel. Gu Fei only had Svelte Dancer, Vast Lushness, and Mothless Sword on his side, and the three were looking particularly worried. They were just gamers, so from a gaming perspective, they felt that the strongest thing Gu Fei had going for him was the spell damage that could insta-kill his enemies. Now that he had given up that indomitable attack power of his, clashing against a fighter in unarmed combat, they could not be blamed for having no faith in Gu Fei, since it was truly a cause for concern to outsiders who did not understand. On the other hand, the players from Eternal War Mercenary Group revealed their utmost confidence in this fight. They already admired Eternal Dominion's kung fu, So even though the person he was now facing looked to be a practitioner as well, the fact he was a mage job class convinced them that Eternal Dominion would no doubt be the victor here. There was also a third party present. Coco did not seem to care about the clash that was about to happen, but instead glanced at Deep Waters. Why do I feel like you're the most excited now that they are about to fight? I'm only wholeheartedly hoping that that guy will be thoroughly beaten by Eternal Dominion, Deep Waters agreed. No one gave the call to start, as the two men suddenly took several steps forward and came to blows in an instant. Gufei was the first to make a move, lifting his leg for a thrust kick right at Eternal Dominion. The fighter did not seek to dodge this attack, extending out his hand in the shape of a claw as he grasped Gufei's ankle. But the kick that Gufei had just thrust out with his right leg had already retracted as his left leg sprang out. Eternal Dominion swiftly changed his hands, but ended up grasping nothing but air. Gufei's leg had already retracted before Eternal Dominion's hand could even connect, and was converted into a sweep out. Eternal Dominion stretched his hand out to grasp it once more. Gufei threw 7 consecutive kicks in this short moment, causing Eternal Dominion to change up 7 times as well, but every time, before he could even touch Gufei's leg, the mage would retract it and shoot forth the other leg anew, striking out 7 times to 7 different points of his body. Everybody that saw it were dazed at the display. To non-practitioners, all they caught sight of was the shadow of Gufei's leg in that brief moment. They were not even sure if either of his feet landed on the ground at any rate, for all they saw were 7 legs kicking out consecutively. How is that possible? How does he have enough agility to do that so quickly? Svelte Dancer was astonished. Naturally, Oathless Sword and Vast Lushness were equally as clueless, and even those members from Eternal War and anyone else that had a bit of inkling and standard could only make out a small portion of his attack. It was not the speed of this attack that was quick, but the rhythm at which he dished them out. The average person would not be able to tell the particular aspect hidden within, just looking at it naturally made them believe it was a result of his speed. Even though Eternal Dominion had matched each of Gufei's consecutive kicks blow for blow, each of the blocks he made became harder and harder to sustain. His hands could barely keep up with the 7 kicks that were sent his way. There was no way he would have mashed up if an 8th kick came in. Eternal Dominion reacted quickly, instantly abandoning the direct confrontation as he quickly took a step back and retreat. In the end, the 8th kick never came. It was all just a false alarm. Eternal Dominion breathed a deep sigh of relief. Both parties had only been testing each other in this round of exchange, probing the depth of strength the other possessed. More importantly, it was an assessment of the opponent's true strength in real life. Sparring in-game was just what it was. With the limitation of in-game stats, it was impossible for them to perfectly demonstrate the true level of strength they each possessed. On top of how different their respective job classes were, the allocation of points would further impact the differences between the two. Thus, sparring in-game would be exactly as Gufei said, they were just playing around. However, it could be said that the skill they demonstrated within the game could still be seen as a rough gauge of their true strength. Eternal Dominion had played the game until he became one of the 5 unyielding experts, showing that he had spent quite some effort on it, and his understanding towards Parallel World was quite deep. He could tell that Gufei had invested all his stat points towards agility from the speed of his execution. As such, Gufei's attack speed was faster than his own. Eternal Dominion had also focused on adding his points towards agility, but had also allocated a portion towards strength. Even though the increase in attack speed that came from allocating points towards agility was not particularly obvious, for people like them, who were looking to chain a series of attacks consecutively, the tiny bit of difference would ultimately become very pronounced when put into practice. Eternal Dominion believed that the reason he was unable to block the 8th attack in time after consecutively matching the 7 kicks from before was a manifestation of this disparity. I'm sure I would not be having such a hard time if this was in real life, Eternal Dominion thought to himself. But I should be able to deal with it since he could only chain up to 7 kicks, not 8. Thinking this, Eternal Dominion laughed out loud. Brother Gu sure is a prodigious talent. To think your 9-chain transformation could throw out 7 consecutive kicks without moving from your original position. How marvelous! Gufei, however, showed a look of remorse. I'm really sorry about that. My tempo got messed up, so I was unable to continue my kicks. What did you say? Eternal Dominion blinked. Gufei smiled as he patted his dimensional pocket. I forgot that I've stowed my sword, losing 20 points in agility. Using this technique requires me to calculate it perfectly, otherwise it will just throw me off my rhythm. Chapter 395, a 10-year-old Shadow. Eternal Dominion was astonished when he heard Gufei. To think Gufei would actually make adjustment in accordance with the difference 20 agility would make. That level of control over his own body as well as his condition reflexes would have to be at a truly perverse level. If what he said was true, then it would truly not be a bit of an exaggeration to call this man a prodigy seen once every 100 years. A talent. This what would it meant to be a true talent. There were some who supplemented themselves through their own diligence, others who had to constantly improve themselves to be ahead of the curve, and other people who would tell others it was possible to find success without any sort of talent. While these people were not wrong in the least, their success did not mean they could surpass the achievements of those who were just naturally gifted. It would merely be wishful thinking for these people who had achieved their own success through such means to assume talented individuals would not work hard themselves, as if such geniuses would merely stay stagnant in the forefront and wait for the others to catch up to them. Such thinking would not fly. Anyone could work hard and achieve results, but talent was something not everybody could possess. Eternal Dominion thought of all this and was once more caught up in memories from days before. 10 years ago, his father had visited the Gu family, and actually lost to the 15-year-old Gufei. Furthermore, it was an utter defeat, an undisputed loss on his part that was soundlessly accepted. Yet his father did not bear a grudge over losing to such a young opponent. However, from that day onwards, this name of Gufei of the Gu family would be raised time and time again, and each time his name was mentioned, praises would undoubtedly follow. Look at that Gufei from the Gu family. From then on, it was a sentence that Eternal Dominion would most often hear when his father mentored him. Gufei had become the primary model for Eternal Dominion when it came to anything about Kung Fu. His name was like a specter forever near his side, looking down upon him condescendingly. His father had hoped Gufei would become an example for his own son, yet it was apparent there were issues to his teaching method. Not only did Gufei fail to become a good role model for Eternal Dominion, he would in fact feel dejected and sour whenever he heard the name. Fortunately, Eternal Dominion was not like most of the children out there, abandoning themselves to despair and becoming even worse when he was constantly compared in such a manner. Instead, he had actually been incited into working even harder, training hard day and night, every single day. He had already set his ambition from that point, looking forward to the day when he would visit the Gu family himself, challenge Gufei to a match, and proceed to defeat him. The next time his father began to mention Gufei from the Gu family, he could then lightly answer, "Gufei? Who the heck is that? Is that the guy I've already beaten?" Eternal Dominion had fantasized such a scene countless times, feeling invigorated and excited whenever he thought of it, pushing him to work even harder towards this goal. However, this wish he had was very childish. As he gotten older, fantasizing about this scene no longer stimulated him like before. However, the effectiveness of his hard work from those early years could be seen, for Eternal Dominion had improved extremely rapidly, something his father was extremely proud of. That statement that he loved to mention all those years finally fell out of favor, replaced with a proud yet somewhat regretful and sad comment, "Not bad. Not bad at all. It's such a pity you do not have the talent that the Gu family's Gufei possessed, otherwise you would surely be up to par." In such circumstances, what else but melancholy could anybody feel, were they in his shoes? Eternal Dominion was truly afraid that he would never get rid of the shadow of Gufei in his heart for the rest of his life, so he continued to train and strive for better. The day he was able to easily defeat his father's eyes too shone just as brightly as when he mentioned Gufei's name. To think you could improve to such a level, who knows what level that Gufei has reached after these 10 long years. Perhaps, you should go look for him. His father's words were subtle, as actually he meant his son should confront Gufei and spar with him. He may not have bared any grudge to that defeat 10 years ago, but he was more than happy and proud to see that his own son stood a chance of standing up for him now. Of course, Eternal Dominion had long awaited for such a day, but it was unfortunate that when he visited the Gu family, Gufei was actually no longer around. After exchanging pointers with the old man Gu, he felt that he was still lacking in many areas, and he temporarily abandoned his plan to challenge Gu Fei. Who would have thought he would coincidentally come across Gu Fei here in Parallel World? While Eternal Dominion showed a nonchalant expression, he was actually very surprised by this deep down. Honestly speaking, as a result of his defeat at the hands of Old Man Gu, Eternal Dominion was already not too confident when he began to spar with Gu Fei. Having lost his sanctum of confidence, the 10-year-old shadow harassed him once more. Beaten into retreat after taking the chain of 7 kicks from Gu Fei, the very fact that he sought to find a reason to explain his own actions could be seen as a manifestation of this shadow. He had no desire to lose to Gu Fei, not even one bit. But Eternal Dominion was simply taken aback when Gu Fei proceeded to mention his adjustment to the 20 points of agility. Eternal Dominion believed he would require quite a bit of time to train and find the appropriate tempo for that attack speed if he were to attempt to recreate the chain of consecutive kicks Gu Fei had executed. But if this man could truly make such adjustments in one go just based off the sensation he had, the disparity between their skills was clear just from this very point alone. Eternal Dominion was still lost in his thoughts when he heard Gu Fei ask, "Did my father use this move against you?" Eternal Dominion was now back in the moment as he replied, "Nope." "Oh, then let's continue," Gu Fei said, abruptly taking a slanting step forward. That step did not look stable, and his body was instead tipped to the other side. Outsiders would find this move to look odd, but Eternal Dominion could distinctly tell what it was. Shattered Jade Step. He was also proficient with this footwork, watching Gu Fei take a second step out for support even as his body pitched, twisting his waist to follow. "That's the Black Dragon's Tail Whip," Eternal Dominion said to himself. He knew that, given how this move was executed, the 2 steps Gu Fei had taken worked to store power, allowing his body to stretch fully with a twist of his waist, ensuring the power of the sweep that followed was astonishingly powerful. The main purpose of this move was not to injure the opponent, but simply disrupt their balance. The real kill move would be the move that followed. Since Eternal Dominion already understood all this, he obviously did not receive this move forcefully. He slanted his body to the side as he prepared to let the sweep go by, his right leg ready to go, prepared to kick Gu Fei down with his emergence of the Black Dragon. Unexpectedly, the kick that came forth from Gu Fei's twisted body was entirely different from what Eternal Dominion had anticipated. The shadow of his kick followed a path that he had not considered, causing him to present his own cheek right to that kick as a result of his dodge. Eternal Dominion was extremely surprised. The only option he had in his desperation was to move his hand in an attempt to block. The moment his arm came into contact with Gu Fei's leg, Eternal Dominion immediately sensed that the kick had a rising motion in it. Grab. Only now did Eternal Dominion finally understood what was going on. He tried to retract his arm, but he was slowed by that half a beat. As Gu Fei's leg volleyed, his other leg had also closely followed as both his left and right legs crisscrossed and struck the blocking arm, with one going up while the other went down. It was not the Black Dragon's Tail Whip. It was Black Dragon wrapping around the post. It was only at this moment that the thought registered to Eternal Dominion. Eternal Dominion's heart instantly disintegrated. To think he had made such an outrageous mistake in judgment. His arm could only struggle out, but that one wave had actually thrown Gu Fei himself away. Gu Fei twisted in midair, not even appearing to have broken a sweat when he landed, smiling as he looked at Eternal Dominion. "You've got quite a lot of strength." That was when Eternal Dominion seemed to have awoken from a dream. This was an MMO game. How could strength be as strong or weak in accordance to whatever their wish was? A move that drew upon the explosive strength of the player like Black Dragon's Tail Whip is not something a mage could use. But Gu Fei was clearly using the posture of Black Dragon's Tail Whip, and for him to instantly change it into Black Dragon wrapping around the post, the level of skill it would require. This was truly a severe blow to Eternal Dominion. Aside from that, he had also deciphered the reason behind Gu Fei's 2 attacks at this moment. The first chain of 7 kicks was to find out his attack speed and reflexes. This Black Dragon wrapped around the post was Gu Fei's way of finding out how much strength Eternal Dominion possessed. As for himself, what had he managed to find out from these 2 attacks? The thought of it caused Eternal Dominion to break out in cold sweat. The first time he had been pleased in how he had managed to deal with his opponent's 7 kicks, while the second time around had him actually mistaking the move his opponent had made. He could no longer let this man take the initiative. Because Eternal Dominion had already exchanged blows with Gufei's father, he had made the assumption that Gufei and his father would be very similar to one another in terms of how they fought, but he now realized how erroneous that was. While Old Man Gu was just over 50 years old, he was still staunchly on the path of toughness and ferocity, using explosive techniques and moves, a style that was exceptionally aggressive yet simple. But Gufei's style, on the other hand, was filled with technical skill and far more deceptive in nature. Take that Black Dragon's Tail Whip and Black Dragon wrapping around the post move he just used. They were both moves found in the Black Dragon Fist style, which in itself was but a branch routine within the overarching Dragon Fist style. Furthermore, Dragon Fist style was precisely what his family, Eternal Dominion's family, was best at. Eternal Dominion had practiced and picked up the various branches found within this fist style since he was young, yet the move that Gufei just used had actually fooled him. Eternal Dominion would not have believed this possible, had he not personally experienced it himself. Eternal Dominion admitted that this feint that Gufei had pulled was a wondrous display of fancy moves, but it was also why he believed he had found Gufei's weakness from it. He was convinced that the moves he had made were flashy, but without substance. That chain of 7 consecutive kicks he had used, there would be no need for consecutively kicking out 7 times if even one of those had connected. Using such a kicking style, with both legs successively in the air, while it did look visually dazzling and impressive, the issue is that he would only be in contact with the ground for the briefest of moments. How would consecutive kicks like that maintain any sort of power? This person must have been praised by everybody too much, and has probably won too many fights. His own execution of moves not only emphasizes effectiveness, he has even begun to pay attention to how they look. Eternal Dominion thought to himself. This guy has been taking the initiative in our exchanges, relegating me to passivity. If I were the one taking the lead, would he still be able to use these feints of his? It seems like people who are often praised as geniuses will often have a bit of a shortcoming, which is that they are just not as down to earth as us common folks. This thought lingered as Eternal Dominion found confidence in himself once more. He gazed at Gufei and barked out a sudden laugh. You took the initiative just then, so I suppose it's my turn now. That's great. Gufei accepted readily. Chapter 396, not knowing how the bluster both men had shown appeared to be a prelude to an earth-shaking battle between them, but it seemed to be nothing more than a show of fancy yet useless moves to the other players watching. Although the battles in MMOs were not particularly terrifying, where bloodied flesh flew freely among combatants, the injuries would still visibly spill enough red to serve as an intuitive visual response for the players whenever they took damage. Thus, it was not uncommon to have blood spurting, be it their own or an opponent's, after a few rounds of exchanges when it came to PvP fights. But given the way Gufei and Eternal Dominion had fought with their punches and kicks, everybody watching the fight instantly considered the duel to be of poor grade since there was an absence of blood to determine the progress of the match. It was mainly the average gamer that had such thoughts, however, as most of the men from Eternal War mercenary group could comprehend the spirit of sparring the two were feeling, even if only a little. By now, there were no longer just people from either party watching this duel, as other pedestrians and random passers-by had noticed that Eternal Dominion was having a duel with someone and had immediately spread this news across all of Lori City. In Lori City, just a random underling in Eternal War would be able to fight a 1v3. Whenever Eternal Dominion got involved, he would only be doing so to find some entertainment from the deed, and there was no way anybody would assume he was being serious. For someone who fought as true and serious as Eternal Dominion, it had been a really long time, at least ever since he first established himself in Lori City, when he was required to participate in a fight himself. The news spread like wildfire, with plenty of players hurrying over to join in the fun and watch Eternal Dominion and Gufei face off. But the current situation caused many of these players to become despondent instead, especially those who came specifically to watch the fight. In their eyes, there was absolutely no way his opponent would be able to retaliate now that Eternal Dominion had taken the initiative to attack. Everybody had been looking forward to watching Eternal Dominion get his ass handed to him, Yet what they had witnessed thus far was the man arrogantly wielding his four appendages. Everyone wanted to cheer on Gufei, but they were also afraid that it would be an open invitation for those mercenaries from Eternal War to greet them with closed fists instead. In all honesty, Eternal War's reign in Lori City was not anything particularly brazen or tyrannical. Yet at the same time they were not modest or meek in how they acted. The mercenary group truly did not have to put anyone in their eyes, and that was precisely how they acted, so no one really favored Eternal War. On top of that, considering the business aspect of mercenary groups as whole, Eternal War possessed such insurmountable strength that the other mercenary groups were all left dispirited. Anyone who had competed against them and lost subconsciously felt as if they had been bullied. All it took was a round of malicious promulgation, and the Eternal War mercenary group got the image they had in the hearts of the players from Lori City. In reality, if anybody were to grab a random player off the street to ask them for a time when Eternal War bullied said person, 99% of the time the players would not be able to give a direct answer. The feelings these people had towards Eternal War were very complicated. The situation they were in could be used as a case study to understand the feelings the poor would have against the rich when the disparity between the two was too huge. These outsiders were all disappointed when they saw Eternal Dominion enjoying the limelight once more, and quite a few of the members from Eternal War were unable to see the profundity, revealing a look of jubilation now their leader was taking the initiative. But Eternal Dominion did not share this sentiment at all. He had been wielding his arms and legs the whole way in, yet Gufei had not fought back, opting to retreat as he kept stepping backwards. Eternal Dominion could tell that throughout this entire procession that Gufei had at least 4 good chances of counterattacking. He had even went so far as to strengthen his defenses in an effort to avoid being taken advantage of. In the end, it looked as if Gufei did not even have the intention to win as he retreated unhurriedly. All he did was simple footwork, but Eternal Dominion was livid with how he stepped. He could easily tell that the footwork Gufei was currently using was exactly the same as what he had learned. Every step that Eternal Dominion took forward, Gufei was already taking the second step. The moment he took his second step, Gufei would quickly complete his third step. Once Eternal Dominion realized this, he quickly adapted and changed to 4 different sets of footwork: arrow step, slide step, opportune step, and ridge step. These were all compatible with the Fire Dragon Fist style he was currently using. But in the end, each and every adaptation he had made was seen through by Gufei. No matter how Eternal Dominion tried to advance, Gufei would unerringly step into the most ideal position, making it seem as if the two men were performing a ballroom dance. The pace of each and every step they made almost conventional. As for Eternal Dominion's attack, every step Gufei took resulted in him hitting nothing but air. Eternal Dominion felt really helpless, because he knew why Gufei could perform at this level. Aside from having an understanding towards footwork and fist styles, Gufei's movement speed was also superior to his. And this was not just the slight superiority he had over Eternal Dominion's attack speed, but a substantial increase in his movement. To Gufei, there was more than enough time for him to carefully identify the steps Eternal Dominion was taking and act accordingly. This was a disparity that the system had created, and it was something which Eternal Dominion had no means to change. Furthermore, every move that the Fire Dragon Fist style Eternal Dominion was currently utilizing emphasized prioritizing footwork to lead, using the hands to supplement before the body came into play. Gufei had accurately pinpointed this particular fact, allowing him to identify Eternal Dominion's footwork and appropriately position himself afterwards. Eternal Dominion's attack was naturally neutralized without him even realizing it. But how could Eternal Dominion not have made sense of all these reasons at this point? He was merely disgruntled. He had hoped that Gufei would make an error in judgment the moment he attempted to vary his footwork. But in the end, he had exhausted the 4th set of footwork, yet Gufei continued to accurately step and turn without missing a beat. Eternal Dominion had almost forgotten to attack with his fists as his 2 eyes glanced lower and lower, staring at the 2 feet on the ground. The 2 feet had suddenly stopped moving. Eternal Dominion felt a wave of glee in his heart. Was Gufei finally stumped and did not know how to react? He raised his head, wanting to punch out, yet he felt something was not right. Gufei was staring at him as well, calmly saying, "You should change your footwork now." Eternal Dominion's head spun. He had only been watching the movement of Gufei's feet all this while, and was not even aware that the fourth set of footwork he had been utilizing, Ridge Step, had already came to an end, naturally forcing him to a stop without him realizing it. He had not consciously decided the next footwork he should be using, yet he had instantly became elated when he saw that Gu Fei's feet had stopped moving. He had actually forgotten that his own feet had came to a halt, which was why Gu Fei was not moving as well. Eternal Dominion found it hard to think. Eternal Dominion instantly felt beyond embarrassed when Gu Fei calmly pointed this out to him. Even if he had a fifth set of footwork to execute, was there any meaning since he had already made a fool of himself like this? The others were completely unaware of this crucial fact. All they had seen was the aggressive assault Eternal Dominion had been doing all this time, while Gu Fei had unceasingly dodged and retreated. Everybody saw how calm and collected Gu Fei remained now that there was an abrupt pause in the action, yet Eternal Dominion looked as if he was in great pain. A round of discussion broke out, especially among the players from Lori City, with Gu Fei now a mysterious entity in their eyes. Just in this short period of time, countless numbers of appraisals had already landed on Gu Fei, and obviously none of them had managed to make any stupendous discovery to explain this. As for the skill Gu Fei had demonstrated, all these people had seen from the start of the match until now was Gu Fei casually stepping around the field. None of these outsiders could tell the profundity in what he had done the whole time. Eternal Dominion had wanted to carry on, yet he was actually at a loss as to what he should be doing. Gu Fei was also in quite the quandary himself. It was just as Eternal Dominion had thought. Gu Fei had indeed identified plenty of opportunities for him to counterattack while Eternal Dominion was consecutively executing move after move on him. He even had quite a few chances where he could confidently win with a single move, but that would only be possible if he had enough strength to execute said move. Unfortunately, strength just happened to be the one aspect that Gu Fei lacked since he was a mage. Thus, he could only watch helplessly these opportunities slip by time and time again. Eternal Dominion thought Gu Fei did not wish to attack, when the truth of the situation was not an issue of Gu Fei not wishing to, but not being able to. If he were to counterattack at any point and fail to penetrate Eternal Dominion's defense due to his lack of strength, it would most likely result in Eternal Dominion defeating him in an instant instead. Even though Gu Fei had clashed with opponents who possessed strength well beyond his own plenty of times in Parallel World, Gu Fei had always relied upon the technique of borrowing the strength of his opponent as his own to resolve each fight. It was just not a viable option in the current situation. First, Eternal Dominion was not a normal opponent. He was also a martial expert well versed when it came to his control of strength. Gu Fei could not simply redirect his strength at his whim. Second, Eternal Dominion was using the Fire Dragon Fist style, which was already a style that utilized softness to subdue force, a kung fu technique that applied the enemy's own strength back on themselves. Attempting to borrow strength from such kung fu would be far too heaven-defying, and Gu Fei did not underestimate Eternal Dominion to such an extent. From Eternal Dominion's use of the Fire Dragon Fist style, Gu Fei could already tell that his opponent could already tell that Gu Fei would have to achieve victory through skill alone as a result of his lack of strength, which was why Eternal Dominion had decidedly opted to use this particular fist style that had a myriad of transformations, flexible and clever in execution. If Eternal Dominion were to continue using this particular fist style to match Gu Fei would really be at a loss as to how he could turn out victorious as long as Eternal Dominion did not make any mistakes on his end. He really doubted Eternal Dominion would be so foolish as to switch to a more ferocious and sharp technique that gave Gu Fei the chance to freeform. Gu Fei immediately realized that if he was really looking to spar with a true martial artist online like this, he would actually still be facing quite a few limitations. Now that both men were standing still without saying a word, the crowd that had been waiting for blood and yet saw none had grown impatient as well. Most would not have dared to make a sound, but why would such conventions apply to the lady svelte dancer? She was the first to instantly yell out at Gu Fei, "Stop dawdling! Hurry and insta-kill him already! Isn't it about time you logged off?" What could Gu Fei say now that this was shouted out like that? But it was Eternal Dominion who suddenly started as he quickly glanced at the time and immediately straightened up. "Look at the time, why did none of you speak up?" Many players within Eternal War instantly began to panic. That's all for today. If the opportunity arises, I'll be sure to seek your advice in the future. Eternal Dominion hurriedly bade farewell to Gufei and quickly led his mercenary group away, running towards the designated log-off point. What's going on? Gufei was still in a daze when he received the system prompt about a friendship request from Eternal Dominion. Accepting it, he sent a message over in passing. What's the matter? Night sessions. Night sessions. Eternal Dominion replied. Gufei instantly understood what had happened. The morning and night sessions were the two time periods where a martial practitioner like themselves would mainly be training. Because they needed to sleep at night and work during the day, there was almost no other time period for them to squeeze in time to practice. The pressures of a modern lifestyle were just too great. Because no one could earn a living through practicing martial arts, training became both a waste of time and effort in the current day and age. It was no wonder the descendants of martial families like his did not view Kung Fu favorably. Gufei sighed repeatedly as he thought of this. The habit of having morning and night sessions was originally non-existent when he was at home, but ever since he took up his job as a teacher, he too had also begun to arrange for such periods. This quest with traversing seas had caused Gufei to neglect those night sessions for several days, as he went through them slovenly each time. Thankfully, the quest had ended successfully today. Looks like I should do a proper night session as well, Gufei said to himself. Chapter 397, Everyone's gotta make a living. No one had expected such a torrential park duel to have such an ending. Neither of the players had even pulled out their weapons, nor was there even a drop of blood spilled. The fact that the fight had actually ended when one of them bolted to leave because they had something to attend to left everyone flabbergasted. Not even the rumored fights that stopped at a certain point would be so abrupt. Eternal Dominion and his men had left with such speed that the players still remaining could only shoot glares of dissatisfaction over to Gufei. He could not have cared less about that. Turning to return to his own group, Svelte Dancer had a look of disdain about her, and while Vast Lushness was used to witnessing such high-profile fights herself, even she did not dare to admit she was an acquaintance of Gufei when she saw how this fight had gone down. Oathless Sword at least reacted a bit better, constantly saying, "Thank you for your hard work," even though he whispered otherwise deep down in his heart. Just what sort of drug did this killer that revels in park from Yunjuan City, renowned for his ruthless and cold-blooded ways, eat today to actually fight for such a long time with Eternal Dominion? They barely even exchanged any blows, yet they said so many words to one another. This is totally contradictory to the style of the Slayer we've known all this while. Gufei and Eternal Dominion had not shouted out their conversation when discussing their respective martial families, so the onlookers had no idea what the two men were talking to one another about. The only thing they took away from this encounter was the feeling that they had just witnessed a really sham of a duel. Guild leader Ruthless, I'll be logging off now that the quest is over, Gufei said to Oathless Sword. Didn't you just say you wanted to clear your park points? Svelte Dancer questioned him. Gufei and she had originally planned to clear the points they had accrued fighting all those men just now. She found it strange that he had changed his mind so quickly. I just remembered I had something else to do, Gufei said. I'll be taking my leave. Take care. Oathless Sword quickly replied. Gufei took several steps away from the group before Oathless Sword suddenly remembered something and quickly shouted, "Brother Miles, do you want us to wait for you before we set off back to Yunjuan City?" "There's no need for that, you guys can go ahead," Gufei shouted back. Now that the mercenary mission was over, there was obviously no need for everyone to set a time to meet up any longer. Gufei reckoned these gaming addicts would likely hurry their way back tonight, hoping to return back to Yunjuan City so as to show off their status as a newly minted level 6 guild. Once Gufei turned to leave after bidding farewell to Oathless Sword, he saw Deep Waters and Coco still standing by the wall, the emotions on their faces similar to that of the crowd of onlookers that had gathered, obviously displeased with the outcome. "Aren't you gonna leave?" "Take care, Svelte Dancer, don't come over and stab you," Gufei said to Deep Waters as he passed. "DSK, I'm not afraid of her," Deep Waters scoffed. What made thieves like her so frightening was their ability to stay stealthed. Someone who could counter stealth like Deep Waters nationally did not put that despicable job class in his eyes, even if that person was Svelte Dancer. "Are you two acquainted?" Coco looked at Deep Waters before glancing over to Gufei. She was a little uncomfortable with the fact that even though this man had slain many of their brethren moments ago, Gufei had actually came over and chatted with them like good friends, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, not really, he's just someone I've slain before," Gufei said as he left. Deep Waters ground his teeth angrily as he told Coco, "Look, bad friends are often bad influences to one another. Anyone who spends time with that asshole would all become equally detestable." "Is Sword Demon that detestable?" Coco asked. That's why I've always said that Sword Demon was a man of talent," Deep Waters said. "Thank you for the compliment." Someone suddenly answered from behind him. Deep Waters hurriedly turned around and saw Sword Demon, young Master Han, and the other members of young Master's elites, as well as Drifting and the other 7 men walking over towards him. It was not just them alone, as the other players from Yunjuan City had also come rushing along every possible path towards this street. It could not be helped, since none of them were even familiar with how to get here. Even Coco's here. Young Master Han was the first to greet Coco, before happily addressing Deep Waters. "I thought you'd lost both your men and your wifey." "Not bad, at least you managed to save her." Deep Waters could only grind his teeth as he stood in his gloom. Sword Demon was looking through the crowd that had already begun to disperse, yet did not discover Gufei anywhere. "When did the fight end?" he asked Deep Waters. "Moments ago," Deep Waters said. "Does that mean Eternal Dominion's already dead?" These men were extremely confident when it came to Gufei. "Nope," Deep Waters said. "What?" Everyone was surprised. If Deep Waters was not dead, then that meant it was Gufei who had perished. Nobody died. Halfway through their fight, Eternal Dominion mentioned he had something to do and left. Deep Waters announced with a hint of regret. "So you're telling me he wasn't insta-killed by Gufei in 2 or 3 moves?" They had all seen Gufei fight. There was no doubt in their minds that as long as Gufei struck, death was the only outcome unless he ran out of mana. Hearing Deep Waters use the word halfway, could it be that Eternal Dominion had actually tangled with Gufei for quite some time? It was indeed quite long. "Both of them were unarmed," Deep Waters said. "Just what in the devil was that about?" No one could make sense of it. Perhaps they were merely sparring due to their similar background? Royal Godcall's guess was actually rather close to the truth. There's even less reason for them to stay their hands if that was the case. Everyone cried out. They were all outsiders, so it was obvious they would not understand that the MMO setting was an unsuitable stage for Gufei and Eternal Dominion to spar. They had tried their best to make it an even fight, as Gufei's spell damage was already an unfair aspect he possessed in-game. It was clear why he had to give that up. Perhaps Gufei's park value had reached 29. Everyone began to examine this issue from a gaming perspective, which resulted in a suggestion proposed by Brother Assist. The people nodded in agreement. "That's thanks to the efforts of Deep Waters bro here. Eternal Dominion should really be thanking you." "Where's Eternal Dominion?" "You should get him to salute you and treat you to a good meal. With drinks of course." Young Master Han said. "Eat and drink your own ass." All the anger and sadness inside Deep Waters was condensed into that sentence, lightly tugging on Coco's hand as he turned to leave. "Let's go." Bye. Coco was old acquaintances with Sword Demon and young Master Han, not forgetting to say her goodbyes with a slight smile as she left with Deep Waters in hand. Over by the other side, plenty of Oathless Sword's guild mates had arrived as well. Excitement grew among them once more now that they were all gathered together. Oathless Sword was all smiles as he walked over to young Master Han and the others. "Haha, the quest is finally over." Young Master Han and the rest already know what sort of reward they had received, since Royal Godcall was still considered a member of Traversing 4 Seas. They knew just how bountiful the reward was for the guild to increase by a whole level just from this one quest, but the average guild member would not really feel any sort of direct benefit from this. Thus it could be said that those members who were the most excited were the core members of the guild, similar to Oathless Sword. Even though the guild had hundreds of players in it, its existence mainly benefited this lot of players, especially the private wealth of the guild leader. To give a very simple example to illustrate this point, if Oathless Sword put his level 6 guild up for sale, buyers would very likely flock like bees to pollen in an attempt to outbid one another. There were plenty of players out there who would love to experience what it was like to be a dominant force in an MMO, and owning such a powerful and large guild would be the easiest and most efficient method to achieve this. This was especially true for any late adopters of the game. With how guilds were developed by the contributions made by hundreds of players, there was simply no way such players would be able to quickly reach such heights. Such a transaction would surely be a chance that must not be missed. In the trade forums of Parallel World, there were already plenty of messages appearing explicitly stating their desire to purchase a guild outright. Currently, the successful transactions were all exorbitantly priced, with a small level 2 guild worth about the price of a single piece of top-grade equipment. The prices for level 3 and 4 guilds skyrocketed even more, and there were usually no more than 3 level 5 guilds in every city, so there was not even a market price for them. There were even rumors that there were professional gamers out that had begun to make strides along this road to wealth. Those who had the financial power had set up their own guilds, organizing their men to begin grinding on guild missions day and night and creating their own product. Some of the craftsmen who did not have any financial backing traveled across the land to the various large guilds or other capitalistic professional players in an effort to form their own guilds, selling their services as players who specialized in setting up guilds in their stead, creating a new group of gamers from this demand. Obviously Oathless Sword did not have any intention of selling his guild like this, but the availability of this option was nevertheless a very satisfying fact, so it was no wonder the man was grinning from ear to ear. Everyone, since the quest has already been completed, there's no need for us to be in a rush to head back home. Let's all head to the tavern. Drinks are on me. Today, we shan't log out until we're drunk. Oathless Sword declared loudly. Few would reject such an open invite, as all these players from Yunjuan City began to inquire which way the tavern was as rancorous laughter and celebrating spread out. Oathless Sword instantly ditched the group of experts he was with when he saw Guzi Ocean, giddily heading towards where she was. After Gufei logged out, he called back home and exchanged polite pleasantries with his father before he went on to inquire about the situation with the Gu family. It was fine if Eternal Dominion was in a hurry to log out for his night training session, but Gufei had not expected to see the huge portion of those players from Eternal War Mercenary follow him as well. When he previously exchanged blows with the men that had blocked their way, Gufei had already sensed that they were most likely properly taught actual Kung Fu. So for the Gu family to actually possess so many disciples, Gufei was very intrigued by this development. If it was that easy to find so many fellow practitioners for Kung Fu, then the martial arts would not be in the decline they were experiencing. Thus, the moment he logged out, Gufei immediately rang up his home and asked his father just what was going on over there. You can't count those as Gu family's disciples, Old Man Gu sighed when he heard the question. Then who are they? The Gu family there has collaborated with some bodyguard school, and is now in charge of teaching them close combat kung fu techniques, Old Man Gu explained. They look to be properly taught, Gu Fei said. Of course they are. Do you really think that the Gu family is a white elephant? Don't you look down on them just because that family's patriarch lost to you in that match back then, and then his kid lost to your dad recently? Your thinking is no different from bullying the weak just because you're strong. Just what is wrong with you? Is it because it's been ages since I properly taught you a lesson? You better get your butt back home this weekend. That's not what I mean. Gu Fei hurriedly interrupted. What I meant to say was he is no longer just randomly teaching them a few moves, and is also formally training them in the ways. How would there be any guarantees towards the conduct of these disciples considering the line of work they were in? Old Man Gu sighed. There's no way they could guarantee it. And so, Gu Fei did not know what else to say. The rules when it came to discipleship were not something that differed from family or sect. The rules were something passed down from the days of yore, a rule that any Kung Fu practitioner should follow at its core. It represented the responsibility and obligation they had towards maintaining unity, harmony, and social stability. Old Man Gu sighed deeply once more. Such matters are becoming more and more prevalent over the years. There's nothing we can do about it. Everybody's got to make a living, somehow. Chapter 398, The New Five Unyielding Experts. Gu Fei and his father ended their conversation after a period of silence. We've all gotta make a living. While this sounded like a comical statement, It was actually a huge issue to anyone practicing martial arts. Martial arts was actually a very extravagant sort of sport. The daily nutrient intake for martial practitioners was high. Kung Fu taxed the whole body, so the energy expended daily went far beyond the requirements of an average human. How would anyone be able to deal with a hungry stomach if they had to exert so much on a daily basis? However, any regular household would be able to provide the basic requirements in this day and age. However, a higher grade of this would be utilizing food and nutrition science, as well as the applicable scientific theory when it came to strengthening the body, training equipment, and so on. These would naturally be far out of reach of what the average household could provide. It was no joke when the nation would often decry how much it cost to groom an athlete. The purpose of training these athletes was for them to achieve results. This was nothing like raising a dog or a pig, only caring that they were fed and well taken care of. This entire process required plenty of specialized personnel and equipment, all requiring a tidy sum of money to maintain. It was just the same with Kung Fu. Naturally, if it was only done for fun and as a hobby of sorts, it would be fine to just casually deal with things. But for martial families like both Gu families, their pursuit towards martial excellence was a lifelong career, so how could they treat things unprofessionally? Taking Gu Fei as an example, ever since he began exercising and bulking up to train Kung Fu, he never had access to anything like nutritionists, physical therapists, masseuses, or any other technical professionals. Without any money, how could he or his family afford such services? Furthermore, how was he able to use any of the strange and specialized equipment used for bodybuilding, since he had no money for them? To have a venue to fit all this equipment also required a proper dojo. Each and every aspect would require plenty of space just to contain them. Was that even something someone earning an average wage living in an 18-story commercial housing could afford? Gu Fei might look like a very poor pay teacher, but it would be a huge mistake if anyone believed that Gu Fei had become a pay teacher for his livelihood. It was just some random job he had found while searching for a way to utilize the Kung Fu he had learned. If he was truly dependent on his earnings from the classes he taught as a pay teacher, there was no way Gu Fei would even have the funds necessary to buy the equipment he needed to play parallel world. The Gu family's standing in the world of martial arts today was entirely unrelated to their ability to do business and make a living. They had already entered a virtuous circle, where the money they earned was able to maintain the expenses of the family, while their practice of martial arts maintained the family's reputation within this circle. It was just that more and more of the family's disciples preferred to earn money than practice Kung Fu. Gu Fei was essentially the only sapling they had left in the nursery by this generation. Every family had their woes. Most martial families were in a dilemma due to their current predicament, yet the Gu family on the other hand did not have money shortages. Instead, they were suffering from a serious shortage of talent. The elders in the family were currently considering if there was a need to change the rule of letting people do as they please. Given the dazzle of the material world they now lived in, where the information traffic itself was so huge, it was impossible for their children to solely focus on just one thing. Even hobbies needed to be cultivated. After all, Gu Fei had already heard before he left that his uncle was prepared to take in the two kids from his elder cousin and train them. Gu Fei had even seen the room they had prepared for the two. There was a large Wu character above the doorway. Anyone opening said door would be greeted with a sight of a curtain that hung above the door, made up of 18 9-section whips. There was originally a wardrobe on the left, but it had been removed and fitted with a weapon rack instead. The large antique vase in the right corner of the room still remained, but a tyrant long spear was placed within it, the red tassel under the spearhead poking out of the vase. The wall across had an exquisitely written work of calligraphy with two distinct characters on it, Kung Fu. On either side of Kung Fu were the two beds for the two children, both the upper decks of a double-decker bed. There was nothing below it, no bed nor stairs. Only a single rope. The walls on the left and right side had hanging drawings. The left was the ultimate moves from the 36 paths of the Gu family fist style, while on the right hung the choice images from the 72 paths of the Gu family sword style. There was also a huge bookcase that Gu Fei had casually flipped through, and every single one featured martial pugilists. There were of course kids who would not enjoy reading, but preferred comics or games instead. His uncle had already made sure that those comics and games were all of the sort that promoted close combat engagement. I just refuse to believe that we cannot cultivate an interest towards Kung Fu if they were to grow up in such an environment. His uncle declared in his delight. His uncle had 2 children of his own who ended up entirely uninterested in Kung Fu, losing him face as a result. The push this time around was essentially his attempt at saving face. Gu Fei seemed to recall that even as his uncle planned and prepared, those 2 nephews of his were no more than a year old, not even 2 yet. There was no guarantee that this sort of upbringing would be effective, either, since that meant the 2 nephews were now fighting every day, bruising their faces and bodies. They had not even begun their formal Kung Fu training. Gu Fei believed that there was a high possibility of them internally injuring one another once they earnestly began learning Kung Fu. He had heard that the family was already prepared for such an eventuality, and had already stocked up on all sorts of drugs and medication that would help prevent blood stasis, even going as far as to discuss hiring a doctor, ideally someone that specialized in both internal medicine and surgical processes, even hiring 2 if the need arose. This was a level of dedication and care that Gu Fei had not experienced back then. Despite how hilarious the situation had now become, Gu Fei was unable to find it in him to laugh. If even his Gu family had their own difficulties to contend fault with, what more could be said about the other families out there that had problems even making ends meet? It was with such thoughts that Gu Fei conducted his night session uneasily after logging off early. He logged on at the same time he always did the following day. He was quite a bit more relaxed now that he remembered he no longer had to race against time to get to some other location any longer. This was also the period of time when Lori City was at its peak usership, as well. All along the street, Gu Fei could hear the discussion about the huge battle yesterday. But what was surprising was that focus of most of these discussion was not about the Yunju City players vs. Lori City's coalition of mercenary groups, instead about the fight between Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion. Did you hear? Someone from Yunju City had a park match with Eternal Dominion. Yeah, I heard about that too. It seemed like the match went undecided. I heard that Eternal Dominion claimed to have something going on and left first. Hey, did he take the coward's way out because he couldn't beat the other guy? I think that might be the case. Plenty of players believe that Eternal Dominion had came up with an excuse to leave because he could not beat Gu Fei. Gu Fei could only laugh bitterly when he heard this, wondering just how Eternal Dominion lived in Lori City when he was so ill-favored in his own city. However, Gu Fei did not think of how he was seen by the players in his own city as a mnemonic murderer, somehow believing he had enjoyed great popularity with his people. Guild leader Ruthless, you guys are still here. Gu Fei had crossed 2 streets and suddenly discovered guildmates Ruthless Sword and Gale Force leisurely walking down the street like tourists, and thus called out to them. The 2 men turned their heads back, spotted Gu Fei and quickly greeted him back. Brother Miles. Not leaving yet? It's not often we find ourselves so far out, so we're using this opportunity to take a look around. The 2 laughed. Actually, Gale Force had seen how exceptional the fighter job class experts were in Lori City and wondered if it was possible there was some rare fighter equipment available in local market, and had stayed around to indulge and put off making the return. Most players from Yunju City had already began their journey back in teams of 3s and 2s this morning, after a whole night of celebration and revelry. Are you heading back already, Brother Miles? Oathless Sword asked. Oh, I'm taking a look around, Gu Fei chuckled, even as he ruminated over the incomplete fight he'd had with Eternal Dominion. Even though it was rather unsatisfying and troublesome for him to demonstrate his moves in-game, taking on someone who knew how to fight was nevertheless a lot better than bullying the average gamer. When he got online today, he had seen that Eternal Dominion was not online. Gu Fei reckoned that Eternal Dominion's job as a kung fu trainer might not be as carefree as his own as a paid teacher. Then we'll leave you to your stroll, we're both gonna head over there and take a look. Oathless Sword and Gale Force bade farewell before wandering in another direction. Gu Fei felt as if Oathless Sword was not in as high of spirits today as he had been yesterday. Logically speaking, he should still be as excited today, having just finished a huge quest. That calm look of his was entirely uncharacteristic of him, making Goofy wonder just what had happened. Goofy did not bother asking them directly despite finding it strange. It was at this moment when someone over his mercenary channel hollered to ask him for his status, so Goofy casually asked this question, to the laughter of those men. It turned out that Oathless Sword had indeed been euphoric after completing the guild quest for traversing 4 seas, and after enjoying a boisterous celebration in the tavern with everyone. He was actually the first to log off. No one knew the reason for doing so at that moment, until Brother Assist came bearing news of the matter. Apparently, the reckless Oathless Sword had not actually been sated celebrating his victory over a couple of drinks online, and had even logged off to post on the game forums, going as far as to declare his guild to be the #1 large guild across all of Parallel World, even ecstatically announcing how his guild had actually completed this huge quest. In the end, the bragging instantly invited ridicule from posters all across the forum. Oathless Sword had let his excitement go to his head, believing that the quest they had received was something only they had access to. He had completely forgotten the fact that the guild quest chain was originally a reward from the PvP tournament from before. Any other guild out there that came in first in the guild versus guild competition would also be awarded it. Even though the content of each quest assigned would be different, the culmination of each quest chain awarded the same things, granting all members experience and coins, before raising the guild level by 1. Traversing 4 seas had actually taken days to complete their quest since they actually had to travel across so many cities, but some of the top guilds in the other cities were able to accomplish their guild quests in one go. While some had failed to accomplish the quests they were given, that claim from Oathless Sword about being the first level 6 guild was seen as a joke. In the days that he had been struggling with his own quest, 3 other guilds out there had already completed their guild quest and reached level 6 before him. Out of the 3, 2 actually belonged to some of the cities he had passed through. One was Dusky Clouds building in the clouds from Y City, and the other was a guild from Linshui City called Waters Horizon. Oathless Sword had been so focused on his quest that he had failed to keep up with the going-ons in the game, making a fool out of himself. Level 6 guilds were no longer what the people were discussing. Instead, the hot topic every player was now discussing animatedly was the changes to the 5 unyielding experts. After the PvP tournament had ended, even though many players had managed to also reach level 41 just like the 5 unyielding experts, the experience leaderboards were arranged by the actual amount of experience the players had, allowing them to distinguish themselves thusly. The original 5 unyielding experts still remained in the top 5 spots as the first 5 names on that list. Recently, 2 out of the 5 that had dropped off the leaderboards to somewhere unknown, Deep Waters and Southern Lone Blade. The 2 new names that now entered the ranks were currently being fervently discussed by everyone. These 2 players were actually both mages. The first was called Slara's Superscript 1. The other was a familiar name that belonged to Yunjuan City, Brave Surge. Chapter 399, Southern Lone Blade. The professional larcenist. The speed at which mages grinded out experience had already begun to shine forth in the game. Having 3 mages within the ranks of the 5 unyielding experts meant that, aside from the top player from the thief and fighter job classes, the champions of the job classes were unable to secure themselves a spot anywhere near the top 3 if they were placed in the mages leaderboards. The 5 unyielding experts title was merely symbolic. If the list was extended, the number of players from the various job classes were about even, though fighters were still in the minority. It was only the mages that saw a surge in numbers among the higher levels of players. Brave Surge was a familiar name from Yunjuan City, and had actually managed to quietly make his way to the top in Parallel World in such a short amount of time. This was also part of the reason why Oathless Sword was feeling unhappy today. While his guild had indeed reached level 6 and now had a 300 member capacity advantage over Corrals, he had personally suffered a complete loss compared to Brave Surge. With Southern Lone Blades dropped from the Warrior Experience leaderboard, Oathless Sword had also risen by a rank, currently resting at the 11th position on said list. It was an extremely awkward position to be in, thanks to how the players in the game had came up with the term 5 unyielding experts, 10 great adepts, and 7 bottlenecks. Naturally, the legendary 5 players that ranked top 5 on the overall experience leaderboard were the 5 unyielding experts. The 10 great adepts referred to the top 10 players in each of the 7 job classes in the game, who also received quite a lot of attention from the masses. It just so happened that Oathless Sword had landed in the 11th position, and while the amount of experience he had compared to the top 10 was most likely insignificant, there was nothing he could do about it, since that difference served as the division between the two different realms. The 10th and 11th places were relegated to. Oathless Sword was right at the edge of this realm. The names ahead of him were all top-rated experts, while the people behind him were all experts that were seen as a grade less. He had unwittingly become the cheerless spokesman for the latter. Every single player that found themselves in the same position had all become cheerless spokesmen. These 7 spokesmen were conferred the title of the 7 bottlenecks, since there were a total of 7 job classes. The 7 dispirited spokesmen of the 7 job classes were often brought up in conclusion, not mentioned out of reverence, but in ridicule. After Oathless Sword had made a mockery of himself when he announced his guild as the #1 guild in all of Parallel World, he was promptly being teased as the premier bottleneck when the latest news of his position came to light. The fact that Oathless Sword could still smile when he met Goofy really showed some strong mental resilience. Of course, it was unavoidable that Goofy's mercenary channel lit up with a wave of derision towards Oathless Sword's situation. Aside from Brother Assist's level being average, the names of everyone in the mercenary group was now listed among the 10 great adepts. Sword Demon was now even ranked second on the Thieves leaderboard. Given how standing before him and taking the top spot was the pay-to-win Warriors Felt Dancer, who was still the lone star that dominated the overall leaderboard, everybody was convinced that as long as Felt Dancer do not die, Sword Demon would have a really difficult time climbing any higher. War Without Wounds was another one who had managed to move up a spot after Southern Lone Blade's fall from grace, and was also ranked second in the Warrior leaderboard. Royal God Call and Young Master Han were more middling, ranking 7th and 8th, respectively. They had also managed to rise up in rank, as a result of players ahead of them dying. The forums bustled with theories and talk, wondering just how so many names from the top 10 had lost their levels in one day. However, Brother Assist managed to bring in a bit more news. The fearsome mage in the squad of 7 that Southern Lone Blade had brought, Flame-Cinched Clothes, had actually been in 4th place on the mage leaderboard, and was a well-known player in Linshui City to boot. So by that logic, it is possible that the squad he brought along were all part of the 10 great adepts, and it was likely their deaths created such changes in each job class. War Without Wounds guessed. Everybody agreed with this assessment. It was a pity that no one else among that squad stood out distinctively, making it difficult for the information expert Brother Assist to find out anything more. Speaking of which, that guy did mention he would be waiting for us in Linshui City. Royal God Call mentioned, "We got to be careful. If we lose to them, changing the names of the 10 great adepts once more, we'll just be giving more trouble to those players in the forums." War Without Wounds spoke up. "It's no trouble," Brother Assist laughed. "That's how we find the joy in our work." Brother Assist obviously understood the mentality of the players that came up with the terms 5 unyielding experts, 10 great adepts, and 7 bottlenecks. Southern Lone Blade must surely have heard that we've completed our mission. It's totally possible that he's anxiously setting up things in Linshui City right now. Shall we stay around Lori City for a few days and distress him? Royal God Call's mischievous spirit appeared once more. Everybody laughed, but from a tactical perspective, it was also a method to dash the enemy's spirit. Wait in Linshui City, carry on waiting. Then, considering how free and leisurely their lives in Lori City were, they wanted to see just how long Southern Lone Blade could wait. Southern Lone Blade was indeed waiting. However, these men from were being far too self-sentimental. Southern Lone Blade was not waiting for them at all. When he discovered that those experts had actually thought he was harboring evil intentions after them, Southern Lone Blade did not bother to correct them, since such a situation would actually work in his favor. Thus, he played along and told them what they wanted to hear, so as to further cement their supposition as a fact. But in truth, the only target Southern Lone Blade had his eyes on was Goofy. Southern Lone Blade was considered to be an accomplished professional larcenist. He no longer dabbled with extortion or theft in the streets. Those players that had to find ways to sell off the equipment they got from their targets themselves were nothing but small fry in the business. Southern Lone Blade, on the other hand, had painstakingly operated his business for such a long time, had already created his own seller's market. where people would often look for him to make requests and purchases. Usually, that meant the equipment he hunted for was far more unusual, exclusive to the point that such items could not be regularly found in the market. Take, for example, those players who flaunted their one-of-a-kind equipment or skill scrolls they had in their possession on the forums. Such people were often the sort that would become Southern Lone Blade's targets. Plenty of clients would reach out to him and indicate the particular equipment they were looking for. These clients of his would not care to ask how they acquired said item, and would only provide the expected payment for said acquisition, which was of course an exorbitant sum. The income of those lowly robbers on the street depended on the items they fenced. But what Southern Lone Blade was selling was his labor cost. This really gave off the feeling that he was more of a bounty hunter for items, with some people even thinking he was rather cool, as if they were not just a bunch of malicious individuals hunting people for their equipment. However, Southern Lone Blade was very well aware of his status. Within the 5 unyielding experts, Svelte Dancer was a top pay-to-win warrior in MMOs, whose name was known across the whole scene. Deep Waters was a specialist, the leader of the most powerful guild in Linian City. Eternal Dominion led his mercenary group, Eternal War, and possessed the ability to oppress even the guilds in his city, while the name Drifting was renowned, having traveled to many cities. He was the 5 unyielding expert whom plenty of players had seen and met the most. Southern Lone Blade was obviously the most low-key out of the 5. He had neither a guild nor mercenary group to his name, spending his days like the average player, never causing too much of a scene. There were not even many players who knew him in Linshui City. The reason why he had worked so hard to attain a spot as one of the 5 unyielding experts was entirely for the sake of establishing a strong foundation for his business. While not everybody knew one another and only had distrust towards one another, the moniker as one of the 5 unyielding experts would naturally be a powerful symbol of his strength. It was through this that he had managed to obtain so many of his clients. Now that his business had stabilized, Southern Lone Blade no longer cared too much about his identity as one of the 5 unyielding experts. It was just that he had worked too hard getting to the point he was at that no one had managed to surpass him after he had slacked off. Southern Lone Blade had originally aimed to be the #1 in Parallel World, but the ferocity of the Apex pay-to-win warrior made this an insurmountable dream. Meanwhile, the experience he had accumulated placed him far ahead of the other 3 in the top 5. Making it difficult for anyone else to eclipse him easily. Purposefully losing his level would have been the most effective and simplest method to achieve this, yet Southern Lone Blade was afraid that doing so would simply damage the image of strength that he had managed to build to his clients, making him somewhat hesitant making the move accordingly. Upon respawning back in Linshui City, Southern Lone Blade began to make preparations for the next step. While the players involved on either side remained unchanged, having the home ground advantage now made things much easier for him. First, arrival at Linshui City would require a watercraft, and the system's ferry service had a near faultless punctuality, becoming a uniquely impactful criterion when setting up an ambush in Linshui City. There were only a few hours where the ferry would arrive from Lori City, so all Southern Lone Blade had to do was watch and wait during these allocated times, and there was no way he would miss out on his opportunity. The only problem was the fact that even though Gufei was his only target, he had plenty of other players accompanying him. This was precisely the reason why Southern Lone Blade gave up striking in Linshui City and rushed to Lori City instead. He had hoped to capitalize during the mess that was the final segment of the quest to provide himself with a window of opportunity. However, he did not expect the other party to have seen through his intentions from the start, and was played like a fiddle. He may have made his way to Lori City, but he did not even catch a glimpse of his target. In the end, there was even news from Lori City that the man had actually took up a PvP match against Eternal Dominion on the streets, and the rumor went that Eternal Dominion had actually made up an excuse and fled because he was not able to beat the Mage. Linshui City neighbored Lori City, so players from Lori City would occasionally spend the time to travel all the way over to Linshui City to enjoy the beach, barbecued fish, and liquor. Naturally, that meant the matters of someone as famous as Eternal Dominion from Lori City would also be propagated rapidly throughout Linshui City. In the words of these players from Lori City, Did Eternal Dominion become part of the 5 unyielding experts because of his level? That was not what was so scary about him. What made him truly fearsome was his prowess when it came to PvP. He was a fighter who mainly engaged in melee combat with his enemies, and had never once suffered a defeat. Saying that might be a little redundant. After all, if he had lost any PvP match, he would have then died and dropped his level accordingly. For someone in the 5 unyielding experts to remain as indomitable as he was, would that not prove that he had never lost a PvP match, and consequently his level? But what Eternal Dominion had gone through was far from this. According to players from Lori City, ever since that man was a newbie, he had fought against 10 or even 20 players like it was no big deal. During those times, Eternal Dominion would be found holding his hand against his brow with a wry smile, surveying the street he was standing on that was now littered with the fallen bodies of other players, like a scene staged straight from the classics. That was how Eternal Dominion's name became as renowned as it was. In the hearts and minds of these players from Lori City, Eternal Dominion would be just as scary even if he was not considered one of the 5 unyielding experts. He was just like an undefeated icon to them. But this man had finally lost, and he lost to the video Mage. Looks like I must reevaluate the capabilities of this Mage, Southern Lone Blade considered thoughtfully. Chapter 400, Ultimate Move. Goofy strolled around Lori City for a while, clearing his park points as he went along until Eternal Dominion finally got online. Eternal Dominion's message also arrived about the same time he got on. Let's continue. We're at the Marshall Field, Eternal Dominion replied. Goofy knew of the place, as he had previously sparred with Gale Force and Yeonju City some time ago. It would most likely be located near the fighter's dojo. The layouts of each city were somewhat similar to one another. After all, he randomly approached one of the pedestrians for directions and made his way over to the venue. Eternal Dominion was already waiting for him by the time he arrived, and the poise he had showed how professional he was. Back when he was meeting Gale Force to fight, that man had looked really cool when he stood in the center of the Marshall Field with both his arms folded. But the truth of the matter was that nothing wasted more energy than striking a pose to look cool like that. This was not a factor in an MMO. It was an issue of the person's headspace. Eternal Dominion was walking around the field at the moment, stretching his arms in the air and exercising his ankles from time to time. There was no need for players to limber up in the game like this, but it was very effective as a form of mood relaxation. It was the difference between a professional and an amateur. Eternal Dominion had also spotted Goofy coming in by now, cracking his neck to the left and right as he said, "Come on then. MHMM. Goofy nodded and raised his hand, blinking right up to Eternal Dominion with a swish. "Hey now, you're not allowed to use that when we're fighting." Eternal Dominion stressed as he regarded him dumbfoundedly. "Of course." Goofy chuckled. "Shall we resume from yesterday?" I think that's more or less what we can do unarmed," Eternal Dominion said. "Shall we spar with weapons next?" Goofy nodded eagerly. Neither party could decisively win when sparring unarmed, since Eternal Dominion had no way of containing Goofy, while Goofy was unable to efficiently pull off any attack on his end given his lack of strength, especially when going up against a fellow martial expert. That is, unless he were to wait for Eternal Dominion to make a mistake, but that would be boring. Conversely, a match using weapons would be entirely different. Weapons essentially increased both their range and scope of attack possibilities, and the space they now had would allow for a greater variation. As such, strength would not become a decisive factor to secure the win, letting Goofy believe this matchup would be far less awkward than the unarmed session they shared before. "What are you using?" Goofy asked. Eternal Dominion retrieved a long quarter staff from his dimensional pocket. "Coiling Dragon Staff?" Goofy asked. Eternal Dominion nodded. The Dragon Fist style was the overarching name for their sect, and while the branching routines within contained fist techniques, there were also kicks and claw moves within. Coiling Dragon Fist was one such branch that was more of a weapon routine, including techniques for weapons like the Coiling Dragon Staff, Coiling Dragon Spear, Coiling Dragon Twin Sabers, etc. "And you?" Eternal Dominion asked Goofy. "Oh, what would you like to see?" Goofy asked him. Eternal Dominion was depressed. But how would he not know this, after his father spent the good majority of his youth praising Goofy? This man was undoubtedly a genius of the ages. His knowledge of kung fu and weapon routines was well beyond what was imaginable for a human to master. Eternal Dominion was a professional martial expert himself, which only made it all the more mystifying to him to see a 25-year-old like Gu Fei have such great versatility across so much weaponry. Honestly, 25 years would be inaccurate. That was how old Gu Fei was currently, but he had near full mastery of all kinds of weapons even before this. For this man to let me choose. How stylish. Eternal Dominion was still envious of Gu Fei's talent deep in his heart. He wished he had the chance to make such an extravagant declaration. Unfortunately, all he could do now was grit his teeth and bark, "Just use your strongest one." Strongest one? They are all equally strong, Gu Fei said. Eternal Dominion was virtually in tears now, before finally saying, "Then use a sword." I have long wanted to experience the Gu family sword style for myself. Works for me. Gu Fei nodded in agreement, pulling out his Moonlit Nightfalls from his dimensional pocket. The design of Moonlit Nightfalls was exquisite, and that dark glimmer that accompanied the sword was the same glow that all top-grade equipment shared. In contrast, the wooden quarterstaff that Eternal Dominion had in his hand was something he handcrafted from a white poplar tree outside the city. The system had called it a wooden staff. It had no stats, no glow. There were even grimy hand marks left where Eternal Dominion often held said stick. The difference in their looks alone was heaven and earth. Eternal Dominion had even somewhat lost his will to fight. Gu Fei, however, had not regarded Eternal Dominion's little wooden staff with disdain. He gave the appropriate sword salute with exactitude as he called out to Eternal Dominion, "Your move." Then, Eternal Dominion returned the salute with his staff in hand, and that staff flew out as he executed his first move. Gu Fei dodged to the side. In the face of Eternal Dominion's attack, dodging was still all he could do. Blocking with his sword was still impossible. The opponent he was up against was also a martial expert. Even if there was not such a huge difference in their strength, the fact that their technical skills were not too far off from one another meant all Eternal Dominion needed was a single chance to press with his strength, and he would be able to come out on top and grasp the initiative. Gu Fei immediately retaliated with a brush of his sword once he dodged the staff strike. The staff was longer than the sword. Eternal Dominion had only needed to raise his hand to strike, but Gu Fei's attempt with his sword required him to step forward a little. He watched as Eternal Dominion's wrist slid out, causing the staff in his hand to fall. Originally holding onto the end of the staff, his hand was now at the tip, shifting his body to the side as he swung his arm in a wide circle, slipping past Gu Fei's sword as he thrust out his staff right at Gu Fei's head. Gu Fei stepped to the side once more, adjusting the direction of the point of his sword, even as his stab continued on its path towards Eternal Dominion. Eternal Dominion had already expected such a modification, changing that thrust of his staff yet again, this time aiming to knock away Gu Fei's sword. Naturally, Gu Fei had no intention for clashing with Eternal Dominion's weapon, so he quickly withdrew his sword. In that short exchange, both men had each modified their attack once. Anyone who knew martial arts would surely be astonished by this scene, but anyone who knew nothing of martial arts would not be able to understand the difficulty behind it. Having sparred with Gu Fei yesterday, Eternal Dominion had some idea behind his style as he lightly commented, "What do you see?" Gu Fei would rarely execute his ultimate move immediately. It was like he was more than happy to first observe what his opponent would do. "Your staff mastery isn't bad," Gu Fei stated matter-of-factly. Just from those two simple moves, he could tell that Eternal Dominion had a rather solid foundation when it came to his skill with the staff. But it was just passable. Gu Fei have yet to witness anything earth-shakingly new. Eternal Dominion seemed more aware of his own standards. After sparring yesterday, he knew there was quite the gap between him and Gu Fei, and his confidence in winning this match utilizing weapons was rather dismal. He was simply hoping to broaden his knowledge and seek guidance for a bit. Thus, Eternal Dominion asked, "What about you? Show me your ultimate move and let me have an eye-opener." "Isn't that a little too soon?" Gu Fei asked. Eternal Dominion felt hurt once more. "Don't be so full of yourself, the match is not over," he blurted out loudly. His already diminished fighting spirit surged once more. "All right then, here I come." Gu Fei already had his sword raised as he shouted. The dim glow from Moonlit Nightfall's blade seemed to follow Gu Fei's hand movement as he began to wheel out his strokes in wide arcs, boldly driving straight towards Eternal Dominion with a stab. "You call this an ultimate move?" Eternal Dominion pouted. "That's just adding a few more fanciful flourishes." With that thought in mind, he casually poked his staff out towards the sword. And it was at that moment when Gufei's sword suddenly vanished. Eternal Dominion was shocked. That glowing blur he saw from the sword before him moments ago had disappeared. Given how quickly it suddenly disappeared, Eternal Dominion was unable to react in time when the sword suddenly materialized right before his eyes, the point of the blade just a short distance away from him. Eternal Dominion wanted to evade in his panic, yet he suddenly felt a cool breeze brush past his neck as Gufei's sword was placed against it. Eternal Dominion was flabbergasted. Gufei was still a little distance away from him just moments ago, so he was confident he could have dodged it in time. How did he suddenly get his sword right up to him like that? Eternal Dominion even suspected that Gufei had used his blink. But this suspicion was nothing but a fleeting thought. Even though Gufei angered him so much that he was gritting his teeth half the time, he did not believe this man would be so immoral as to mask an in-game skill as Kung Fu. Gufei was in no hurry to withdraw his sword as he gazed at Eternal Dominion with a smile. "Is that good enough?" Eternal Dominion grit his teeth, wanting to ask what had happened, but he consciously stopped himself from doing so. He decided he would rather try and think through that series of changes by himself instead. This was definitely not some fantastical phenomenon that had happened in game, so it was surely the changes that Gufei had implemented to his sword technique. Eternal Dominion's eyes immediately twinkled as he turned towards Gufei. The birth of spring and summer's lull, the harvest of autumn and winter's horde? The name was a mouthful, but this was a famed technique from the Gu family sword style, extremely famous. Sure enough, Gufei nodded. "That flourish was the birth of spring?" Eternal Dominion asked. Gufei nodded again. "And when you disappeared? That's winter's horde?" Sequentially, summer's lull should follow the birth of spring, yet that vanishing act was a conscious change that seemed closer to winter's horde. Gufei nodded once more. "And the move after that was summer's lull?" Eternal Dominion thought back to the moment when that sword of Gufei had suddenly appeared by his neck. A nod once more. "So where's the harvest of autumn?" Gufei seemed to have only made 3 distinct motions in that short period of time, and Eternal Dominion could not seem to recall where the 4th step had been. "The harvest of autumn would have killed you." Gufei put away his moonlit nightfalls. Eternal Dominion was depressed once again. "We're not sparring anymore." Eternal Dominion placed his white poplar staff back into his dimensional pocket. It felt as if Gufei had been toying with him all this while. Had he really showed his ultimate move, he would not have been able to defend himself. Gufei did not say a word, not trying to be humble or attempt to console the man. What use would his consolation be when placed before the naked truth? And trying to be humble at this point. Was there a need to be humble considering the level he had reached? If Usain Bolt came out to tell his opponent no, I'm rather slow myself, would that not be as good as insulting the other man? Thus, Gufei stowed his sword and asked Eternal Dominion a question he was more concerned fault with. "I heard that you are some sort of instructor for a security firm?" Eternal Dominion blanched visibly. They were both Kung Fu practitioners, so they were both very clear what his intention was, but he could only helplessly reply to Gufei, "I'm only trying to make a living out of my Kung Fu." Gufei did not comment on that. All Kung Fu practitioners were well aware of the pain of being unable to utilize their art despite having spent almost all of their life practicing it. But Eternal Dominion's dream was more direct. He simply wished to depend on his Kung Fu to make a living. As for Gufei, his current situation could be said to be ideal, euphemistically speaking, when in reality, it was more like he had nothing else to do with his life. "Those professional gamers in this game, have you come into contact with them?" Gufei suddenly asked.